There we go, and we're live on this. I just thought I turned off the beeps. Session of virtually connecting ePatients with myself and Joe Murphy, and we may get one or two more people joining us to talk about this week's YogaMOOC. So I'll introduce myself really briefly. I'm Rebecca Hogue. I am the a co-director of Virtually Connecting and the creator of Virtually Connecting ePatients. And I'm doing a PhD in health professions education, particularly looking at patient health literacy. And over to you, Joe.
I'm Joe Murphy. Professionally, I'm the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College, which is our campus teaching and learning center. And I'm a serial MOOC dropout and a virtually connecting hanger-on. So.
Oh, almost a guru, almost, I'd say. Virtually connected.
I think I got a couple of steps to guru, but I try to be helpful.
Cool. And so this week we're talking about week 2 of YogaMOOC. And it's interesting because we were just in the pregame show talking a little bit about sort of the scheduling and stuff. And what I find challenging is that I do a lot of the MOOCing on Monday. And so by the time we get to Sunday to talk about it, I'm like, I had to go back and look at my notes. What did I remember this week?
Mm-hmm. And then I'm kind of the opposite where, and honestly, this is where I find the synchronous session is really useful because it does force me on Saturday and Sunday to try to cram in a week of yoga practice. And I guess that is one of the reasons I think I am a serial MOOC dropout, that the only kind of online workshops that have been successful for me have been ones where there was an element of synchronous accountability. I think knowing that there were other folks who were going to want to get together has been very useful for me, although what it has not been useful for is actually a week of practicing a physical skill. And that's something that we were just talking about, that yoga and meditation more broadly, it feels hard for me to do this the way that in the Iliad class I could kind of be on my own schedule, and sooner or later I'll get the Iliad read. On this one, it feels like I've really missed something if I haven't kept up with practice.
And this is where I wonder if that or just that the practice is too advanced or too problematic. Because I can't. And I've done yoga a fair bit before, but post-surgery and stuff, I don't have the shoulder strength.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And so I get caught really quickly. And I tried to do the mini class.
Mm-hmm.
Hi guys.
Hey.
We're live, Autumn.
I noticed that.
Don't let them drive.
Yeah, you look
doing
good. Good.
Figure out something ain't right with the volume. I have it turned all the way up, but you guys aren't super loud. I can hear you, but I'd like you to be a little louder.
Are you on your speaker instead of your headset or something? Or does it think?
On my phone. What's that? What does that do? Oh.
Is that better?
Phone speaker.
Is that better?
That's better.
There we go. Yay!
Hey, how y'all doing?
Good.
So, yeah, I'm out looking around at houses, and I just relocated to Green Bay, so I'm kind of looking for a place to live.
Wow. Do you have do they do buyer's agency there?
I don't know what that is.
Do you have an agent that represents you as the buyer as opposed to?
Yes.
Because most agents represent the seller, not the buyer.
I don't know, both in Columbus and here, you've got seller. If you get an agent, you can get an agent as a seller or a buyer. And of course, you can choose to not have an agent either as a buyer or a seller, but it's usually not in your best interest unless you know about real estate.
Right.
Yeah.
So
because we found here with the agent, they could get us into places too. Like our agent took us on a tour and we would just see a for sale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I could just get you in. And she had the smart lock thingy that got us into all of the houses, which is totally not how we would have done it in Canada.
we had this fantastic guy when we were house hunting in DC. And I feel bad because we ended up not buying a house in DC and I took a job in Ohio. But this guy was outstanding because he had been a contractor. So the one thing, we can look around and say, okay, how's the money work? How's the location work? What are we going to do with this house? We can do all of that. But this guy was, in one case, probably literally saved us from a $100,000 money pit.
Wow.
Like said, I will not put in a bid for you. I know you want this house. We're going to wait for another bidder to get an inspection, and then it'll be a matter of record. But we were in the basement. And he was like, no, those are masonry issues. This is going to be very expensive. I know $100,000 may be high, but it was certainly $50,000 that he saved us.
Wow. That's big.
And by not having.
So yeah, and still trying to figure out if I'm going to buy or rent, all of that kind of stuff. But we're not here to talk about me and my relocation and my house hunting. We're here to talk about YogaMOOC.
YogaMOOC. Yes, we were talking a little bit about how some of the physical parts are challenging because you can't cram it into a day. But also it's just questionably challenging. And I found doing the mini thing, and it's not that I couldn't do the downward dog. It's that it wasn't just the downward dog. It was the downward dog that then flew into with one leg, whatever. And that was just like even more on the shoulders, which is where I have weakness. And so I'm trying to figure that out. And I'm like, okay, how do I even work around?
So I guess one question I've got, have you seen anything in the MOOC that talks about how to adapt a pose? Because they talk about it's totally okay to adapt the pose. I have one tip, which for me, it's not shoulders, but it's wrists from bad, repetitive stress issues. And I've noticed actually that a lot of poses that they say to do with a bent wrist, your wrist is much stronger like that. And if you make a fist and stand like that, actually, you'll notice this is how our ape cousins walk on all four. They don't do that. I actually learned it from an anthropologist who teaches this to students. I'm like, oh, downward dog is much less painful if I do this.
Wow.
But that's because it's my wrists. I don't know what would help with the shoulder.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they talked in the video briefly when they were showing the downward dog about being able to go on your arms, like bent arms, which I've tried that, but it's still not. And then I just end up doing child's pose, which actually child's pose is problematic for me too. So it's just like one thing after another. And I'm like,
really? Child's pose is problematic for you?
Yeah, it's the holding the arms above the head.
Okay.
In that laying down position is too much. It's too far back. It's just a weird angly thingy. And so it just becomes very not happy in the shoulder area. And so I find actually the yoga I'm having less, I guess I'm finding that part less interesting and I'm more interesting in some of the videos, and the mindfulness meditation one worked for me, but the compassion meditation did nothing for me, which has really surprised me. I don't know if you guys tried those ones.
I did the mindfulness. I did not do the compassion. So I'm interested in why you found that.
And Autumn, how about you?
I have been a very bad yogini in the YogaMOOC.
Yogini?
So I wrote one blog post about Bhakti Yoga. You guys know what Bhakti Yoga is. It's the yoga of devotion. So it's the yoga of persistence, right? It's the yoga of and it's the yoga of love and adoration, right? You're persisting because you love your guru or you love this connection with yourself or whatever, right? Like it's this devotion that you have. And so I knew that this was going to be a problem for me because I struggle with some Bhakti yoga. I know this about myself. But I also think it's interesting because it's a yoga MOOC. And one of the things we talk about in MOOCs a lot is persistence, right? Is completion, right? Is, resilience in these things. So I think it's an interesting connection there, but I have not watched either one of those. I've watched a little bit of the first week, and then I was traveling, and then I got sick. So I'm really good at excuses.
Or what it's like.
Not as good.
I'm also way behind, and your excuses are way better than mine.
There's my cough. Like, it's real. I'm really sick. So, but here's one thing that I have. I'm glad that we are talking about mindfulness, because I do practice a type of Vipassana meditation, and I have done twice. I've done 10-day silent retreats in a Vipassana tradition. And I need that, right? So like that helps me with the whole devotion, bhakti, like persistence kind of thing. When I'm like at a retreat center with 50 other people, right? And nobody's even speaking to each other. We have a routine that's very much, you know, like you wake up in the morning, you go meditate, you eat breakfast, you go meditate, you take a break, you go meditate, right? And it's just like this very regimented kind of thing. Then I do okay. But one of the things that this has done for me is that I have woken up, I think early, like 3 or 4 times now, and sat. So it has sort of inspired me to try to get back to this, you know, try to get back to that mindfulness meditation. And I mean, I really need to do it. I notice a difference when I do it. I'm more focused, I'm more clear, but I have not watched either one of those videos. So that was my long roundabout way of saying that I haven't watched either one of the videos. I apologize for going on so long.
No, I think that's great. Like, and it's funny because I did the mindfulness one, just the 5-minute, the first one, and I felt a sense of peace afterwards. And so that's what's kept me going back to repeat that one. But what I learned early on in MOOCs is to take from it what I'm getting from it, and if it doesn't work, throw it out or don't bother, kind of thing. And so there, you know, I'm traveling next week. So for me, it's sort of like I don't think I have the energy to maintain this while I'm traveling. I've got too much else going on, and I can't say that I'm getting enough out of it to keep in it. But the mindfulness part was interesting. But the compassion one was really, I don't know, it's a similar exercise. It's just that you think about, you know, having compassion towards different things, and sort of that mental compassion. And I just didn't find that was the way in which I express compassion. Maybe that was it. I just didn't feel like just sitting there meditating on compassion was active compassion for me. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I think there's something I've done a lot of different kinds of meditation. And I've done that kind of compassionate. Usually when I've experienced that, it's usually like a very short kind of, it's almost like your savasana when you're doing the physical poses, right? It's kind of like the way that you end. And it's just like maybe 5 minutes of like, you know, sending love out into the world, and you know, trying to connect with all the other beings and that kind of thing. But I don't know about just sitting down and just doing that.
Yeah, I know that my experience has been interesting. That mindfulness generally works for me, and actually, I really like mantra-based meditation, which probably, you know, perhaps speaks to my Catholic upbringing, and I'm used to chanting. Chanting's easy.
Counting beads, right?
Counting beads. But yeah, some of the guided think about these things meditations, I'm very variable on those, and a lot of them I end up thinking I would rather be doing mindfulness than pondering the connectedness of all beings.
And when you guys say mindfulness, you're talking about having a fixed point of focus where your mind will naturally kind of wander, because that's what the mind does. And then realizing that the mind has wandered and pulling it back to the fixed point of focus, right?
Right.
Yeah, very well described.
Yeah. There is a lot of, I've had a lot of experience with that, and that is extremely helpful in terms of training the mind, in terms of finding clarity, in terms of finding focus, especially if you're somebody like me who is kind of highly creative and highly, you know, I'm very divergent, right? I'm like, hey, let's just try everything and throw it all out there, right? And that's why I probably struggle with the bhakti piece, right? So like trying to pull that back. But I did have one Buddhist monk guide us in a meditation that I found really transformative, where um, she had us not try to pull our mind back to a particular place, but rather to just note that it had wandered and to let it wander and let it continue to wander, and just to watch it wander, basically, which was really kind of crazy for me because it, you know, when you are watching your mind wander, the question comes up, what is watching and what is being watched, right? And so it gets a little weird.
But I like the way you've said that, because I've had that as well. And so I find that when it's hilarious, but I get into this and, you know, they're like, you talk about the tip of the nose and breathing in and out of the nose, but I actually focus my breath on my stomach, and that's just because of the way I breathe. My hands on my stomach, but I actually see the thoughts as thought bubbles. So I watch my mind, and then a thought will come in and I'll put sort of a bubble around it and then let it float away. It's a very, very sort of visualization of the thought bubbles going here and there, but being able to, oh, there's that thought bubble. Let's let go of it and see what the next thought bubble comes in. And it's sort of like watching the mind wander, letting go of the wandering at the same time.
Yeah.
And the bubbles aren't bursting.
Thank goodness.
Away.
You don't want too many bubbles bursting. Maybe a few, but
yes.
So I have a little bit of a similar, it's more like a street scene for me, but the idea of like noticing, not so much a bubble, but actually it kind of is like little marching words. It's kind of, thank you for coming. You may go now.
Right?
Usually because my mind has wandered into something that's stressful. I'm like, that's, you know, the thing I should be doing instead of meditating. And I'm like, nope, it's okay. I have 10 minutes for this. You can go.
Right. So listen, guys, I'm so sorry, but I've got to get to my next house appointment. So yeah, I've got to run, but it was so great to see you both.
Yeah, great to see you.
Glad you popped in. Good luck.
Lots of love.
Bye.
Namaste.
But yeah, it's I wrote some I did a blog post that just went up, so I don't think it's hit their hub yet. So I had some thoughts when I realized that I had sped up the video lectures on digital distraction to 1.5 speed and was listening to them while I checked Facebook, and I said, this is a moment to reflect on. Something's not clicking here.
Well, it is and it isn't, though, right? Like, because it's sort of like the having sped up, and I think I ended up speeding some of them up too, because I'm like, because I think I'm spending too much time on something, and it's actually a more efficient use of time to just speed it
up. And that's where I hope I got to, and I'm not sure if I did, but I think it's the tension between the fact that this format allows the learner to make their own choices, including hopefully some metacognitive choices about, you know, again, people like us who probably live in this literature can say, yeah, digital distraction, I've heard it. I probably know a lot of this and I can listen to this quickly. so it allows us to be autonomous and metacognitive, perhaps. What I got into was the issue of whether that's respectful to the work that those other people did. And I think that the issue of the did I pay attention to the instructor, to the people who were communicating? So there's a little in there on kind of on lecturing more generally. And I think it's attention. I don't think it's something to be resolved necessarily.
It's an interesting reflection there, because I actually found myself how to not be, what's the word I'm looking for, defensive when I listen to this kind of stuff. It's sort of like this presumption that I'm not being mindful about how I use things. And the reality is that I think I am very mindful of it. Now, I have mechanisms in place to prevent some things. Like I have a timer on my computer that actually kicks me off every 30 minutes, which means that if I sit down at my computer and I start Facebooking and then I get kicked off, I know I've done it for 30 minutes.
Right, yeah.
I know that the next time I have an enforced 5-minute break. And then when I sit down again, I know that I've met that quota. Yeah. Right. And it's like, no, you can't do that. If you want to get any work done, you need to stop doing those and start with the thing that you want to get done. But usually it means that it's based upon the Pomodoro technique. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's the same sort of theory, except that I actually have a timer on my computer that, unless I'm video conferencing, it actually doesn't count down when I'm on the video. But otherwise it does, it counts down while I'm on it. And so I'll also find that I'll be into, because when you're doing writing, right, and you're so, that's right brain, isn't it? You lose all track of time, right? Right. There's no sense of time when you're in that creative space. And so I used to think that I got up to take breaks a lot. Once I, and then I'd realize that I would be writing on something, and then 3 hours later, and like, yeah, my back hurts and I can barely move and all of this. And that's what actually started me with this thing it surprises me when I'm writing how quickly that half hour hits, because I don't have sense of time. But these are types of tools that I've put in place, and I do YogaMOOCing in that 5-minute break. So if I'm going to MOOC, I MOOC in the break when I'm not allowed on my computer. So I'm actually on a mobile device then, because then it's my iPad in a different room, and I'm usually doing the dishes or making food or doing something and listening to the video. Right. Or mat work now, because now I'll say, okay, 5-minute break, great, 5 minutes, let's go do one of the videos on my yoga mat. And so I have these routines in place already that make that kind of thing sort of work. So then in some ways I found listening to this activity of being mindful of when you pick up your device and all of that kind of stuff, I'm thinking, I already do that.
That's interesting. I did not reach a mindful awareness of my own defensiveness. That's a really interesting reflection. I worry, and broadly, although I think it does apply to these lectures, I worry a little bit about the sloppy boundaries in these conversations. That, it's, he says, hunched over his laptop that's sitting on 3 paperback books on the floor, because I wanted to be where I could close the door and be quiet. There are the physical aspects of, are you using this device in a way that is simple, that, in a very pure way, I think healthy, is one thing. I think the stickiness of platforms is really a very different issue. Did anybody do anything on Facebook I need to know about? And I mean, kind of as an interface issue, I think that's its own thing. And then I think there's this third area of kind of the mindful choice that's more located in yourself, and also the culture that says anything that can be known must be known, and known immediately. they seem importantly different bins to me. And running them, even in that, good grief, that was one terrible sentence. Even in that description, I worry that they get mushed up in ways that don't, to me, explicate much about, well, then what do we do about it?
Yeah, and I think some of this for me comes to, in my original dissertation project, I was studying mobile learning. Mm-hmm. And so I have this hyper defensiveness when people do bad things, without that blurring the line of all of the good things that come of it, right? And you're telling me about intentional use of my mobile, or do I need to, you know, it's like, yeah, but I know how to not turn off notifications. I know how to turn these, make these distractions go away so that I can be focused when I want to be focused, but I'm also allowed to not.
Yeah.
I don't have to always be focused, I suppose. But I also really just, yeah, so I do have this defensive, visceral, negative reaction when people are, when all I hear is the negative, right? And the minute I hear things like addiction associated with, like, but it's not, I'm not addicted to it because I like the convenience of it.
I'm so glad you said that. And this is another thing that I wrote in the post, because I am really, I believe there is a strong possibility that I am out of date with what is known psychologically about the way to use the word addiction. But I am extremely concerned about the use of that word in particular. And also a kind of a general medicalization of something that is not strictly medical, but in part, particularly, I'm very worried about the use of the language of substance abuse that's not to a behavior that's not about consuming a substance. I don't understand how medically that's useful as opposed to rhetorically. And rhetorically, like you, it makes me distrustful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite possible that someone who's actually done the research or read good popular treatments of it could explain that to me. But probably all three of my uncles had their lives shortened by addiction, and one of them was probably killed outright by it. And I, you know, that word has a lot of meaning for me, and I really want to know when people use it, how to take it.
Yeah, especially
as like addiction or in the same way as addiction.
Yeah, and in particular, especially when they start talking about teenagers and mobile device and media use, because it's so often related to that whole, because I don't understand it, I assume it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Or I assume it's bad. And then, you know, then I assume it's overuse. It's too much because it's something I don't understand. And so, and then it becomes addiction. And I'm like, well, wait a second. And I do know that, you know, yes, there are extreme instances where psychologically they've shown that they have the same drivers, right? But that's extreme instances, right? Yeah. We're not talking about the average use, but that word gets thrown in as if the average person is using it. And it's sort of like that if I drink a glass of wine with dinner, I'm not considered an addict. Because I use my, you know, Facebook or whatever, like it just seems.
And I would say even when I have been in the situation of making the bad health choice that I come home and de-stress by having 1 or 2 drinks, it's a bad health choice. It's still not addiction.
Yeah.
It's something which, given my genetics, makes me, fortunately, I say, all right, we have to watch that, but it's still not addiction, and that's important.
Yeah, and so I think that's, again, one of those things that gets my hackles up when I hear those words put into context, then I get defensive about it and going, yeah, I'm not sure I buy this. And maybe it's just a blinder that I put up, but I know that I put that blinder up the minute it's trigger words. It's like when people start talking about learning styles. Again, it's sort of, or the, what was it? It was the net generation or digital native, right?
Native,
Yeah, certain words. And it's like the minute you say that, I'm not going to listen to anything else you say.
Yeah.
You know, because you just hit a trigger word that tells me that you probably haven't done your research.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I don't want to say that necessarily about this course or the people that are putting this together, because chances are they have done their research. It's just, it's an area where I feel a little bit like we've gone too extreme.
Yeah, I mean, if you've done the research, then take the 5 minutes it will take to say, when I say this, here's what it's based on. And I mean, as it happens, last night I was at a trivia party, and it is actually difficult to there were multiple times when we were looking at our little sheet of questions, I'm like, well, I could just pick up my phone, I put it in the little don't use your phone basket, because if this was just a Googling contest, we'd do something else. But you know, there were multiple times where I'm like, well, you know, if I Googled this, I wouldn't be Googling the answer to the question. So, I mean, it's interesting the way that's certainly a behavior pattern. It speaks to that attitude. I cannot sit with unsurety. But those are not behaviors, even that I would say so much should be discussed as problematic. They're just, they are where they are. And the issue, I think, is to be mindful.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for example, to say, it would make the game less fun. You know, that's in that particular example, to be on your device would be scratching an itch and sacrificing the actual point.
Yeah.
Whereas
that sort of changed the whole trivia challenge activity. It reminds me of our family has my in-laws have this practice. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law, they get the giant, I think it's the New York Times that has the giant full-page crossword puzzle at Christmas every year.
Oh, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or New Year's every year, or whatever. They have a window in which they have to do it, and the rules are, of course, you can't use your devices, you can't Google it, but you can ask anybody.
Oh.
So
right.
It becomes a social activity. So we do it as a family. We're sitting and everybody in the room, and they read the questions, and we see what we can answer and see if somebody can come up with it. And then if nobody can come up with it, who do we know that might know it? And then it causes a phone call, right? Because you can phone people to see who might know the answer to the question.
Hey, Bob, Happy New Year. I need a 6-letter word.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's sort of we create our own rules around how we do it.
Fun.
The sort of fun way to, sort of make that trivial. So it's still a very cooperative, not competitive game. And yet we do take the Google equation out of it. Mm-hmm. And it then becomes more of a social who do you know, which is actually the old way we used to do things.
Right.
Right? Like before we had Google, right? Yeah. It was, well, who do you know? Who might know this? Who can I ask?
It feels like once upon a time, every bar would have behind the bar a copy of the Guinness World Records and like the People's Almanac and another reference work or two that were basically there to shut up bar arguments. Or you just wait and, you wait until somebody comes in. You say, hey, you'd know who won the 1978 World Series.
The problem with all of that, though, was it was always the person who was the most certain they knew the answer, not necessarily the most correct answer.
It is possible that last night we established that the new team rule is that whenever Joe is really, really sure, we're going to check those answers with Bob. Eric Mazur once referred to that as a self-correcting problem. Although at least once I was so convinced of an answer that was obviously wrong that it did get the table to coalesce around the correct answer. That was at least useful.
Yeah. So you're so clearly wrong, but yeah.
But productively so, as opposed to the other one where I actually convinced us to turn in the wrong answer.
Yeah, which in the end is yeah. So now more people know the wrong answer.
True. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to look at the process one? I started reading the optional reading around it. There were a couple words that they used. Here it is. It's eudaimonia.
Yes, I did.
It's funny because I listened to it and I'm like, I don't get what she's talking about at all. And then I tried to explain it to my husband and I'm like, oh, it's just happiness is a process rather than a destination.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, that's it. Okay. And that's the blog post that I ended up writing because I was hiking and I talk about how it's about the hike. It isn't about where you're going.
Okay.
Right. It's not about it's not, I do in that case, I was doing a 4-mile loop. It isn't because I ended up back where I started. Right. So it's never really about where you're going from that perspective, but it was just about being out in nature for that 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And the random things that happened. And in that case, I saw wild boar for the first time.
Really?
Like it's, I think I might have seen them in a zoo or something, but to actually see them in the wild.
Cool.
When you're out hiking, it's like, wow, that's kind of cool. This whole California thing, I get new animals. Like it was snakes last weekend. I saw like a wild rattlesnake.
We had a while I was writing my blog post, I had a 4-point buck walk past the house.
Oh wow!
Which deer are not uncommon. We're in a very rural area, and the Ohio deer herd is not a surprise. But this was a pretty majestic looking 4-point buck. You could kind of understand. I am not myself a hunter, although I make no moral claims about that because venison is really tasty. But you could kind of understand the desire to go out in the woods and see if I can see one of these animals. I could kind of get it
mm-hmm.
in a way that's different from what I usually see wandering around the house. The does and young deer.
Yeah, we get lots of deer out here too, which is kind of fascinating because I'm really in the city. Although I suppose when I'm walking, like where the wild boar are, I don't actually expect to see much because it's grassland there.
Okay, yeah.
Right, and shrubs. So I don't typically expect to see animals. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, is it a cat? Because that scares me more than anything because it is mountain lion territory.
Sure.
Not that boar shouldn't be more scary, but it was far enough away and I was able to scare it and it ran. And then I took a couple more steps and then discovered that there was a sow with 3 piglets.
Oh, yeah.
Also there. So I was able to scare them away because they were on my path. Right? Like, and I've done 3 of the 4 miles. I'm like, I'm not turning back. You're going to move.
I'm planning on a 6-mile hike.
Yeah, exactly.
I would. So I would expand a little bit on the concept of eudaimonic. That not only that happiness is that part of the process of which usually leads to happiness probably involves some unpleasantness. That the hard parts of self-actualization and self-realization are not to be avoided, which I think is probably more complicated than maybe I give it credit for.
I think it's similar to learning though. If we go back to learning isn't easy.
Right.
Right? Like you do your deepest learning when you put effort into it and when you really reflect, or when something happens that causes you to have to do something different, or you fail or something, right? Like there's something that learning is not this easy thing. And so in some ways one could argue that happiness is also that thing, right? And if you were happy all of the time, you had this, I don't think it's possible, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense, that coming to the definition of happiness where you can say, this is an issue in my life and it's hard and I'm working on it, actually produces a feeling of happiness or self-compassion or whatever you want to say. That's not just kind of the recognition of toil.
Yeah. Contentment in some ways, I think, almost more of a goal. And yet I look at it and I go, but there is still a goal there, right? There's always got to be a goal. It's like, I track when and then back into this awareness, right? So part of that awareness of when I go hiking, I'm not on the internet because I'm actually in a range where I don't have coverage, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the hike, I don't have coverage, but I still carry my phone. It tracks my, I have my run keeper, so it tracks my statistics. The map still works, so I don't get lost. I can see where I went. And it's got my camera on it, so I can take pictures of the wild boar that are in front of me. So I'm not letting it go. I'm just using it in a very, very different way.
Right.
But I thought that was sort of an interesting awareness of devices, because it isn't about, again, putting the device away so much as it is putting it on airplane mode so the battery doesn't die on me.
Right.
And
that's a good point.
Using the other features of it while I'm out there.
Did you see Alan Levine's post about the mountain range near his house?
No.
It's on his blog. I think this conversation makes me think you'd enjoy it. And part of it is it's a reflection on the fact that you can hike the same mountain multiple times and continue to learn things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to continue to learn things about topography, that, even after you've, the thing that you've looked at multiple times and suddenly you realize is actually not the highest peak in the range. Or I think that's his example. Which I think relates to a lot of these things, that that you meditate with the same brain, and it's not always the same.
Yeah, it's like can you meditate backwards? It's sort of like when you hike the same trail a few times, but then sometimes you try it in the other direction and you see completely different things when you hike in the other direction. I was like, oh, I didn't realize there was a viewpoint there, right? Because it was behind you, you wouldn't have seen it in the other direction.
Yeah. Huh.
Actually reminds me of a particular time where we made a wrong turn on our bike trip. We were biking across Thailand and we had missed our turn. We were supposed to make a right turn and we missed it. And so we kept going straight. And when we turned around to go back to make our turn, there was this giant laying down Buddha. And when I say giant, the thing must have been 50 feet long. Right? Like it was this huge, giant Buddha that we'd ridden right past and didn't see.
Yeah.
And then when we turned around and it was like, we went right by it. And I'm like, And had we made our turn where we were supposed to make it, we totally would have missed it. And so it's sort of like the I guess the sort of fateful things that happen when we do things not in the order in which we had planned.
Right.
Serendipity.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That feels like a stopping point. I don't know if that.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, I'm not sure if there's anything else I can think of that, but that, yeah. So with serendipity, I will turn off the broadcast.
Okay. Thanks.